So I was lucky enough to be able to participate in a study program at Tufts University last summer. And while I was there, I spent a decent amount of time in the library researching about the imperialistic nature of US foreign policy in Nicaragua between 1908 and 1933. And while I was there, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time in the library. And one of the messages I sent to my parents was something along the lines of, "I just love the library here," followed up with a message about how awed and amazed I was by the number of books that library contained. My parents responded that this was such a Molly comment and attitude, and they later told me that they were impressed and possibly relieved that one of my biggest takeaways from my first real experience away from home for an extended period of time was about libraries. Entering the library for me represented a return to my years spent as a child in the libraries, hours upon hours, looking for books after books after books to read. I felt as though the library was my safe place, a place where I felt sheltered from the outside world. It probably sounds cheesy, but I felt the knowledge. And I felt the power. Libraries have so much to offer those who are willing to take the time to explore them and get to know them. There are definitely more than just books in a library, and there are more than just words in a book. Each book in and of itself is a separate world, worlds that vary drastically depending on the style of writing and the genre. That's why I felt understood when, for Christmas last year, my mother gave me a book titled The Library Book by Susan Orlean. The library gives the storyline and history and importance of libraries through the storyline of fire that occurred at the main branch of the Los Angeles Public Library many years ago. On the morning of April 28th, in 1986, the fire alarm went off at the Los Angeles Public Library. Those inside were not initially worried, as the fire alarm went off quite often. It was a regular occurrence in an old building with a poor maintenance record. But as the minutes went past, they realized that this wasn't just a drill. There was something more serious going on. And soon enough, they saw the smoke rising from the stacks of the library building. One of the firemen recounted that as soon as the first stack got going, it was goodbye, Charlie. The fire reached 2,000 degrees, and the flames were said to be colorless because of their intense heat. It burned for more than 7 hours, destroying 400,000 books and damaging another 700,000, many of which could never be restored. Investigators were on the scene immediately, and yet, because of how large and widespread the fire was, they were never able to determine where it started. In the book, Miss Orlean talks about one very peculiar character, one character that stands out among the rest, a man by the name of Harry Peake. Harry Peake was by nature a liar. He never told the same version of a story more than once, and because his account of what he was doing on the morning of April 28th changed so many times, no conclusive evidence was ever found. To this day, it is still unknown whether the fire started because of arson or just because of the age of the building. Miss Orlean, in one part of the book, talks about entering a library for the first time as an adult after a long period of being away and feeling an instant sense of recognition. The sights, the sounds, the smells, libraries are tactile in ways that so many of our daily experiences no longer are. Entering a library, you feel the same way every time. You have those same sights, the same sounds, and the smells. Libraries provide a space where discussions about books can occur, but not just books can be discussed. Anything, really, for that matter, can be discussed. I spent a large majority of my life outside of the United States, but when I lived in Washington, D.C., we would go to the library quite often, and we would also spend a lot of time in the library in San Antonio, Texas, and St. Louis, Missouri, where my grandparents live, usually over the summer when we were visiting them. And all the time, these libraries had reading contests where you could win prizes for the number of books you read. And I would always compete to read the greatest number of books. In St. Louis, for example, you could win tickets to a baseball game, or you could be entered in drawings for different electronics and weird gadgets. For so many years, I insisted that I compete to read the greatest number of books. No one ever forced me to do it. In fact, I was the one who always insisted that someone take me to the library to sign up for the program and then continuously pick up my prizes once I had earned them. Because I was convinced that if I didn't go right when I earned the prizes, they would be gone. Being able to, of course I was competing against other people, but more than competing against other people, I was competing against myself. I pushed myself to read faster and faster, to read more and more, to the point where I would fly through page after page after page of a book, and my parents had to pry me away from them because I would spend hours reading. As I became older, it became much harder for me to reach those goals of reading a certain number of books because the books were no longer chapter books, and I found myself being pulled in more directions. But I realized then that the reason I had been reading for so long wasn't because I wanted to win prizes. It was because I felt as though I could escape from reality through books. I could spend time away and immerse myself in a completely different world. Even if it was just for a few minutes or even a few seconds, it really didn't matter. Libraries, I always felt at peace when reading, as if there was nothing in the world that could disturb me at that moment. Books can be an equalizer in the world. They can join different groups of people together, people with different socioeconomic backgrounds, ages, places that they're from. It doesn't matter. Everyone can rally around the same book, and some of the most interesting discussions can stem from what many would consider just a simple book. But libraries provide a place where books can be discussed, but not just books can be discussed in a library. Anything really can be discussed in a library, as long as it's done in relatively low voices, because no one wants to be warned to be quiet. The familiar, shh, we're in a library here. Just as books can bring people together, however, over my life, I have definitely realized they can also be a line that divides us. Many of us in this room today would consider books to be abundant and easy to access. We see them in our homes, in our classrooms, and of course, in the library on campus. But we don't realize that they're a luxury to so many other people in the world. There are so many people who don't have access to a library, and many people who don't even know what a library is. Because of this, and the fact that not everyone has access to the equalizing space of books and libraries, I've dedicated a lot of my life to mentoring and working with those who are disadvantaged. I've worked with students who are disadvantaged in Colombia, in South Africa, and of course here in Honduras. A lot of times when students come and ask me for tutoring, it'll be something about writing or speaking, something like the alphabet, and I always help them, but I always catch myself thinking, what if these kids had greater access to books and libraries? Wouldn't the literacy rate in countries skyrocket? The literacy rate here in Honduras is about 80%, and I'm not saying that's terrible or anything, but what's stopping it from being 100%? What if all those kids had access to books and libraries regularly? While I was in Cape Town, I tutored at a school in an impoverished area, and I visited about once a week. That school had a library. There were books in the classroom, but the library was dimly lit. The shelves had dust all over them, and it just appeared as if no one had used the library in so long. Because of this, I made it my mission to encourage these kids to read more, even if it was just for 5 minutes every day, or every other day even. And the results were honestly astonishing. The kids, after reading and immersing themselves in books, they were so much better able to comprehend the things they were being taught, and they were able to express themselves more concisely and clearly. It was almost as if they didn't need me to tutor them anymore. They knew what they were doing. Now, this was only with a group of about 10 kids, but imagine if all kids and adults alike had access to those libraries and books. The world would be a different place. I kid you not when I say that when looking for schools to apply to this past year, I took their libraries into consideration. I imagine myself spending hours upon hours in the library, whether I'm studying or just walking around, perusing the aisles of books. I imagine myself looking up books in a database for research papers and studying with friends and peers in the glass study rooms, looking out at the views and learning a thing or two. I don't mind. You can call me a nerd. In fact, I'll say it myself. I'm a nerd who likes libraries. Thank you.